Hey, and welcome back to the new season of Shade with me, Lou Mensah. This season, we will be reflecting on the power of the image within the civil rights movement, and my guests include founding members of Black Lives Matter, photographers and editors from publications such as Time magazine and ID, curators and art critics, and together we will be reflecting on the imagery and the stories that came from the Black Lives Matter 2020 uprisings with the people who created them. And I want to say a big thank you to all of my Patreon patrons. I'm honoured to have you all involved in this show and supporting this work and elevating our stories. For as little as £1 a month, you can become a Shade patron and join others in supporting this work and elevating our stories. So go to patreon.com/Shade podcast to become a patron. So here we go, episode 2. Image 2, Vogue, the September issues 2020. Support for Shade's Black Images Matter series comes from Chloris, creators of organic, superior grade CBD formulations. I talk with the co-founder Kim quite often about our holistic approach not only to health but also to our children's education, an education that nurtures an interest and investment in the world that we all share, and part of Chloris's investment is being a long-term partner of the charity Help Refugees. Chloris's co-founder, Pedram, has spent many years working with refugees as an interpreter. Kim said of our collaboration that it's crucial to support platforms that engage in important conversations surrounding race, as Shade does so brilliantly. So go to chloriscbd.com to find out more about the range and for information on Help Refugees. And sign up to support Shade through Patreon and you'll receive a Chloris subscriber gift. Okay, so episode 2, in conversation with ID Magazine's Fashion Features Director, Osman Ahmed, followed by photographer and former senior photo editor of Elle.com, Mariel Tyler. You'll first hear from Osman, where I'll ask him when he first saw himself represented in the media.
I certainly remember after 9/11 feeling represented in the media, but perhaps not in the way that I would have liked, and not in the way that, me or my family or people that I know from the same background identified with. I think that there is this thing, I suppose, when you grow up without representation, you don't realize that it's missing until one day you have a light bulb moment, or perhaps you see it and suddenly you think, hold on, this is, why isn't there more of that?
Yeah, really interesting. I do wonder if part of the reason why we do the work we do is because we are responding to that lack of that we saw growing up. And I remember my first experience of ID was like over 20 years ago when I first went in and met Alistair McKim, and it's been your 40th anniversary, actually. But ID's always led the way regarding visual representation and inclusivity. So, the work is always being done there in that regard. But, when the protests gained momentum and the conversations were happening about representation, I just wondered what was going on or what work was being done behind the scenes at ID. Did you see a shift in the internal discussions you were having at work?
Like you said, ID has always really covered issues around race and politics and youth culture and activism. And also it has a very diverse team. Over the summer, I think the whole team, myself included, felt like this was something that we had to really, really devote our energy to. The online team, we didn't publish any fashion pieces or, everyone put their focus on covering protests, and that kind of transpired into the first part of the 40th anniversary issue, which was a zine called Uprisings, which came out in September. And that was a celebration of Black voices. It was photographed entirely by Black artists, more established names like Tyler Mitchell to even an 18-year-old, Navani David. So I know that the whole team and Alistair, our editor, was really, really wonderful at saying to everyone, you need to kind of follow your instinct and cover what you think is right and use this platform for important discussions. Having worked in fashion magazines, there is always that conflict. ID was founded with the kind of ethos of DIY and street culture and punk and straight up photography and giving a platform for emerging creatives that wouldn't have found a platform in more traditional glossy magazines.
It was really interesting to me that in September 2020, we saw more fashion magazines featuring and covering Black talent within the content of the magazine, but also on the covers in a way that we really haven't seen before. And we have to mention British and American Vogue here because, the world looks to those and the covers are very recognisable and people watch what is happening there. And I'd just love to know what you thought of fashion's response to the uprisings as a whole.
It's tricky, isn't it? Because fashion is an odd place to look for deeper political and cultural conversations because by its nature it is superficial. And I mean that in the sense that it is about visuals, it is about the look of things. I suppose it's changing slightly in that people are becoming more aware of how things are made and where they come from. But really, it is an industry that is predicated on change, on trends, on the ephemeral, on a kind of short attention span, So it can sometimes trivialize important things. This year, it has really kind of people have demanded more. It's no longer enough to just have diversity in an optical sense. But really, I think that fashion's response to Black Lives Matter has kind of been, it's kind of had a bit of a shock because overnight it has realised that it has some pretty major issues on an institutional level that it needs to deal with. And that's something that requires a lot of time. The kind of change that I think that people want to see, the kind of change that is needed, is going to require a much longer timeline of commitment. And so I think it's too early to say because as I said earlier, fashion, it sometimes adopts things, if only for a season. And then next season it's something else.
Yeah. You talk of the shock, and I sensed the shock, and I just thought, oh my gosh, I'd love to be a fly on the wall right now in these offices. And as it all happened so quickly, I just wondered if that you thought that perhaps internally the magazines were aware of what issues that they needed to look at, or was it a complete shock? Like, oh, we didn't realise this is how we were viewed and we didn't realise that we weren't doing this and that we weren't representative?
Well, that's a really good question because I do think it would have happened because magazines have been in a weird place for a while. They're kind of in survival mode at the moment. When suddenly you've got a revolution on your doorstep, it's mayhem, it's chaos. What is really interesting to me is that, in theory, fashion as an industry that is so much about change, in theory, this should be an industry where we are so ready to embrace change. But actually, in practice, it is an industry that is very much built on 19th century, early 20th century values. And so it struggles to change. It struggles to embrace newness.
As they claim. There have been countless examples of big fashion brands being accused of racism. Gucci is being accused of profiting from blackface. Moncler released a line that some say resembles the harmful Sambo stereotype. Katy Perry released shoes.
I just wondered what you thought about the pledges that the fashion industry made during the summer, and how able are they to continue to acknowledge those pledges? Are you hopeful about that, Osman?
You know what, I am. I suppose the beauty of social media is that it is now very easy to hold people accountable. So, but if you make a pledge, there are now, and you don't keep it, then it's very easy for people to take to whatever platform they want and say, well, why haven't you done this? Or this isn't right? Or we demands that you do. And I think that definitely one of the pledges that I was really happy to see gain such a great response was the 15% pledge. That, the 15% pledge, for anyone that doesn't know, was started by Aurora James, who has her own accessories brand. She is African American, and she realized that most retailers, they don't carry products, or they don't carry Black-owned businesses. Black people in America make up 15% of the population. So she created the 15% pledge, which is an initiative that essentially holds retailers accountable to committing 15% of their shelves to Black-owned businesses. And I think that is something that is really simple, really effective. And I know that a few magazines I think American Vogue may have also signed that pledge. I think where it becomes more slippery is when it's kind of a vague pledge. The thing is, you have to be hopeful.
And so many of us have been doing the work all along. I hate that term, doing the work, but actually it does feel like work. And it's usually the underrepresented or the oppressed who actually are the ones who have to educate those around us. And so 2020 was a lot. And collectively, the creative industries have really been contributing to move the conversation forward. And I just want to finish off by asking you what light you see in this long road that we're on towards better representation in publishing.
It's funny, it's interesting that you were talking about kind of doing the work, because, I know that this podcast is focusing on imagery. And I think that one of the really interesting things for me over the summer was that suddenly everyone was sharing these reading lists. And I was thinking, how have you never heard of James Baldwin or Toni Morrison or Maya Angelou? Like, it just was anathema to me. I was like, oh my God, maybe I have been doing the work, but I've never thought of it like that. It's been so kind of subconscious. With imagery, it is a lot more visceral and a lot more immediate. And, you think of the imagery of the murder of George Floyd as something that really, it just lit the fuse of a bomb that just exploded around the world. And I think that imagery, compared to literature, can sometimes be really effective in communication in that way, which, working in a very image-centric industry, that is not lost on me. And I think going forward, that is something that is really on my mind. To go back to the beginning of our conversation, growing up, I didn't see representation of myself. An image can tell you that you are beautiful, that you are worth being celebrated, that aspiration is within your reach. We can never have too much of representation, because there is no one single image that represents an entire race.
Shade Podcast and Convergence at the South London Gallery have co-curated a 4-part conversation series where, together with our guests, we will be asking, does the media have the potential to challenge racism? South London Gallery's Convergence platform hosts critical conversations, screenings and written commissions, freely available to everyone on their website. For our first talk on January the 23rd, I'll be in conversation with Kevin Morosky, filmmaker, senior advertising creative and co-founder of POC, the network accelerating equality and equity for culturally and ethnically diverse people in the creative industries. The talk will be available from January the 23rd on the South London Gallery website at southlondongallery.org/project/convergence and also on your podcast app as bonus Shade podcast content. So I look forward to sharing that with you and I'll see you there. Okay, and welcome to part 2, where I speak to photographer and former senior photo editor of Elle.com, Mariel Tyler. Have you seen a shift in the discussions that you've been having since the summer of 2020 at work in terms of representation and the narratives that maybe the clients want you to portray or the narratives that you want to make sure that you get across in your work?
I want to say the ideas were always there. It was like always trying to get like minorities ideas developed and like getting their ideas to be taken seriously by like upper level. That's kind of like the issue that I would see across the board that I think kind of is happening less because of Black Lives Matter. But it's diversity is at the table, but the whole argument about like equity versus equality, like there are resources for these projects. But if someone doesn't think they're worth putting money into, like it just makes it harder for certain stories to come about. And then, the minorities or who have to like push these stories are just stretching themselves to make it happen. The movement has kind of got these brands to just make up for lost time, And it's kind of, it's weird seeing these like bigger brands like try to figure this out, because it is a fine line between like a genuine approach and something that's more like performative. It's like because everyone's working from home and I like a lot of people, I'm just like bouncing around between like family and friends and stuff right now. And so I get to hear like these like, some of my friends work at like bigger media companies. I get to kind of hear like how they're handling things. A lot of my friends have been like overwhelmed by just the way their companies are dealing with it, because they're throwing money at it because they know it is a serious issue. So they're like trying to educate their employees. But it's also hard because like we as brown people, like we live this. We have to sit through these like mandatory racial reckoning sessions that these corporations are making people do. And like a friend of ours, it doesn't matter where she works, but she has to like the company she works for started like this whole initiative that's like just for Black content, and like on top of the work that she does, she now has to contribute to this platform that's like just for Black content. And like I'm like, are they going to pay you more for that? Like why? I don't know. It's like that's not the answer.
And in September 2020, we just saw so many covers featuring Black talent. American Vogue had Jordan Castille's work and Kerry James Marshall's work on their cover. And British Vogue had Missan Harriman shooting their cover. But how both Vogues responded to the uprisings was really interesting to me, because this is what they are putting out to the public. And obviously we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. And I'm just really interested to hear what you thought about the contrast in their responses.
Okay, so the idea of these Hope covers is, I'm quoting them, is to explore in all its interpretations, elevating the voices of those above all who are determined to create positive change. Okay, that's nice.
They hear it like some bitches. I dreamed of a place.
The juxtaposition between the two publications to me is always pretty stark. I guess I'll just start with US Vogue because I'm a little more familiar with it. It's always been this like aspirational magazine, right? It's like very well curated, good journalism, beautiful imagery and fashion. Obviously there are more magazines that are like more in touch with reality than Vogue, but like Garage or Cultured or something. But fashion obviously isn't always about reality. That's the joy of it. So their point of view isn't always capturing like the zeitgeist, and it's partially rooted in this like American elitism that doesn't really bode well in today's climate. So in a way, they have been a part of the problem. As much as I love Vogue, I always have, but like there is this kind of like tinge to it that I can't really relate to. And you think of covers that they've done that have been a little problematic, like that LeBron James Giselle one back in like 2008, and like recently that Annie Leibovitz Simone Biles cover, like they could have used a Black photographer or an editor to like figure out that, you know, just to have a voice in the say in the outcome.
Simone Biles is the cover star of Vogue's August issue, and fans were quick to note that famed photographer Annie Leibovitz was the wrong choice to take photos of the 23-year-old champion. Why? Because just like many white photographers, she is not properly lighting Black women. That cover, offensive.
It was.
I know editors have like a handful of go-to photographers that they use, but if Vogue like really was trying to be intentional, like why haven't they used more Black photographers to shoot the cover since Tyler Mitchell? Like, I think he still is like the only one who shot an American Vogue cover, and that was almost like 3 years ago. On the flip side, they have had a lot of subjects like Rihanna, Serena, Cardi B, Lupita. But like who's in the room holding on to these golden tickets that they like give out to Black people a few times every year? And I think they're like slowly starting to see Black people like less as subjects and more as potential peers that they can work with. But like going back to the covers, I guess I appreciated that they used artists. Like I think it was like a different approach that was kind of like, it's just interesting. You can read more into paintings. I think it's inherently a medium that can be like more abstract, even like how the artist both depicted, just like the skin tones alone. Like I think Kara James Marshall said, he referenced the way he does his skin tone, it's at the edge of visibility, which I kind of think is how Black people are a lot. You know, they're just marginalized until, I don't know, until they can't be. Like right now, it feels like we just are fed up, right? And the subjects, Kara James Marshall's subject was imaginative. So like he kind of is more representing like the Black female, kind of, instead of just using like fame as a way like they normally do just to like plaster Rihanna on the cover doesn't really feel like it would work right now. But I don't know, just knowing that the covers come from people who are experiencing what Black people are experiencing, it feels more personal. Like, and Jordan Castile, like we're almost the same age, like a peer, a young woman, you know, depicting another peer, I think was powerful. Instantly, like she removes that like male gaze that's kind of nested into a lot of fashion photography. And also like, she's kind of interesting. Like her grandfather was a big civil rights leader, Whitney Young.
You don't get Black power by chanting it. You get it by doing what the other groups have done. The Irish kept quiet. They didn't shout Irish power or Jew power or Italian power. They kept their mouths shut and took over the police department of New York City and the mayorship of Boston.
She kind of is like carrying this big legacy, but through her art, which I appreciate, I think. I mean, obviously Edward Enninful as like a Black male, like I just started off from reading the letters from the editor, and his just hits home a bit more. It just seems more in touch than the US counterpart, you know, Anna Wintour. Hers didn't seem as sincere. Like honestly, white people are part of the problem that Black America is facing, right? So I don't know if her letter took any responsibility. A little too roseate for, you know, the climate, but I guess I appreciate the sentiment. Like, okay.
Yeah, I hear what you say. There's a difference between a curated response and a lived response from the lived experience. So they're two completely different things. And
yes, yeah.
when I first saw the American Vogue covers, like I adore the work of Kara James Marshall and Jordan Castile, but one thought that I had instantly was like, yeah, I can engage with these covers,
Yeah.
But, where are they coming from?
That's exactly what I thought.
What place and what intention are they coming from in terms of the editor, because we hear what's going on inside. I'm wondering what's going to happen with the next issue and how are you going to be more inclusive moving forward, and, what is the editor's statement? And I just couldn't get out of my mind all of the things that I'd read from Andre Leon Talley, the things that he had said about the environment there at American Vogue. And
the world of white privilege is complicated. The world of white privilege. The statement came out of the space of white privilege. I want to say one thing. Dame Anna Wintour is a colonial broad. She's a colonial dame. She comes from British. She's part of an environment of colonialism. She is entitled.
But at the same time, I'm like, wow, this work is epic. It's brilliant. And so, but my mind is taken to everything I hear about what's actually going on in those offices. And so I have to separate the two, the work and the conversation that's coming through about the environment there.
Yeah, going back to like Andre Leon Talley, and like I read his book and like reading all that about like his relationship with Anna Wintour, I was like, no, like you don't want that to happen. Like, here's this man who has like so much clout and he's so like well versed in fashion, and I don't know, like in my mind, if it would have made way more sense to have him write something for this issue. Like there's an article of Hamlish Bowles, and I was like, why is he writing something? I don't know. I was just like, his voice could have been so good in that issue. Like, why not? Like,
Yeah, I think so. That's so interesting. It's funny because we get presented these products and we're like, oh yeah, okay. And then I think that maybe Vogue has some catching up to do. And I've just had a conversation with the fashion features director of ID here in the UK, and he feels similar to you in so many ways about all of this. And he was just saying, fashion is aspirational, right? It's a kind of fantasy, and there's only so much that it can actually do. But what fashion has to do and realise is that they are aspirational, but perhaps people's aspirations are changing, and realise that people actually demand a lot more of the content that they're paying for. And I just wonder if magazines are going to respond even more now to this as a turning point, if they are going to respond more to public discourse around representation, and they're realising now that they actually have to listen to the audience and respond.
We're, America's so capitalist, like they like, if there's money involved, like they'll change. Like, so I think honestly, like they're realizing like the buying power that Black people have. They're realizing like the cultural power that Black people have. Like, I don't think anything can exist if Black people decide to like, the call out culture is so strong. Like if Black people decided to, like they could end things, like I'm not trying to make it like a Black versus white, but like just acknowledging the presence and power of Black America it's a huge part of this like reckoning. Like, so I think honestly that it will change consistently from here on out. Like, even like the smallest things get called out on social media. As much as I'm not good at social media, but I appreciate it for kind of the things that help to create, it's really helped create change in media and in fashion too. So yeah, I'm confident that things will just only get better from here.
Yeah, that's really cool because, it's that hope that helps us like put one foot in front of the other each day, within the environments that we're working, and we are seeing change happening and that's great. But yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I just wonder what light you see in this long road that we are on together towards better representation.
I hope that just like as a photographer, I think that, seeing Black people more regularly in publications and advertising and social media, wherever it is, like it kind of helps humanize us. I think that is the biggest problem here is like empathy. America's like so weird right now. And I think it's comforting to know that I have a skill set that can like attribute to how Black people are seen in the media and how we've always seen ourselves as like intriguing, complex, intelligent, warm, fun-loving people. So like, I think as long as people like me are motivated to create work that, shows Black people in that light, like, and I don't just like to shoot Black people, which is also something that's like another conversation, but like Black people are like pegged into shooting Black people. But I don't know. I'm like, I know how to shoot all types of people. Honestly, like baseline, it's about like humanization of Black people, because I think that's what gets me the most.
Yeah, that's a beautiful and important response. And, every one of us has our own role within that. And I think to myself, okay, when my daughter's looking at this, when she's older, this history that we're all living through, we can, I can say to her, I was having the conversations and I was talking to the creatives who were creating change within the work that they were doing. And it's been a blessing. So,
oh my gosh, you're too nice.
Thank you so much, Mariel, for today. And that's a wrap on my conversation with Osman Ahmed and Mariel Tyler. Speaking out about your workplace is always risky, especially if it's in an industry like fashion. When I was reaching out to prospective guests to talk about the fashion covers discussed in this episode, there was an invisible line that had to be drawn between them speaking up about their experiences in fashion, and also they had to consider the effect that would have on their current positions. So it's not just uncomfortable to talk about the realities of being a minority within your workplace. The reality is that you could lose all you've worked for. And fashion is not ready to face the truths about how they support the scaffolding of white supremacy. We're tired of seeing fashion magazines put just a Black celebrity or artist on the cover. This is not the same thing as creating an inclusive and respectful workspace. And it's clear from the stories that emerged last year that many fashion organisations, including, for example, American Vogue, Refinery 29 and Man Repeller, for example, were failing their Black and brown staff members. So the work has not been done. And so, for coming on this show and talking about their experiences, I really thank my guests for coming on today to share their truths. And those are my thoughts after talking with Osman and Mariel, but I'd love to hear from you too. Drop a line on social media and let me know what you think. If you enjoyed this show, please support the work by subscribing via whatever app you listen to your podcasts on, and consider becoming a Shade patron by visiting patreon.com/Shade Podcast. Shade is produced and hosted by me, Lou Mensah, and the music is created for Shade by legendary composer Brian Jackson, half of the power duo Gil Scott-Heron and Brian Jackson, and additional music is by Luke Cage. Thanks to Content is Queen for assistant editing and to CA Davis for editing, mixing and sound design. Be sure to listen to CA's own brilliant show called A Lato Thought. I'll let CA tell you a little bit about that now. Thanks for listening. See you next time.
My name is CA Davis, and this is A Lato Thought, an immersive podcast that dismantles post-racial myths about mixed-race identities. Analyzing American history, law, and empire, each episode examines a contemporary idea about mixed-raceness in order to reveal that
race is the lie that became real.
You see, in America, mixed-race people have been routinely exploited to both justify and challenge systems of white supremacy.
The hypo-descent rule became the formalized definition of hereditary slavery.
But people are not mixed. History is mixed.
In the early 20th century, in Harlem, New Orleans, Black and South Asian peoples made lives together.
The Creek Nation and the Cherokee Nation joined at Greenwood and Asher, right where the Tulsa riots occurred.
And it's those historical processes of empire, war, immigration, economics that mix us all up.
The idea that mixed race people are somehow more biologically, genetically fit I mean, that's just not true.
Some multiracial people say, yes, they are Black, but it doesn't encompass the fullness of, say, being raised by a Korean mom.
So tune in as academic research and histories are brought to rich sonic life and woven together with the voices of intellectuals leading their fields. Follow the show on Instagram and Twitter, both at LATTO_THOUGHT, and subscribe on your favorite podcast app today. My name is C.A. Davis, and I'll talk to you all soon.